last night to the continuing riots in the USA. Now, before we get back to that, regular listeners will know that our future relationship with China is a regular theme of this show, because I very much think that it needs to change. And this very much has been brought into focus by the events in Hong Kong over the course of the last week. You know, we've had Joshua Wong on the show begging Boris Johnson to take leadership of this. Well, we haven't heard from Boris Johnson on it, but we did hear today from the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab.
Let me also be clear about the approach that the United Kingdom intends to take. We don't oppose Hong Kong passing its own national security law. We do strongly oppose such an authoritarian law being imposed by China in breach of international law. Mr. Speaker, we're not seeking to intervene in China's internal affairs, only to hold China to its international commitments, just as China expects of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, let me just finish by saying that even at this stage, I sincerely hope China will reconsider its approach. But if not, the UK will not just look the other way when it comes to the people of Hong Kong. We will stand by them, we will live up to our responsibilities, and I commend this statement to the House.
Well, that was Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary. Joining me to discuss that and, more importantly, a new future relationship with China and indeed America is Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East and Chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Tobias, good evening and welcome to LBC.
Good evening to you.
A lot of us have very much wanted Boris Johnson, given that we have a moral obligation, I think, to Hong Kong. We've wanted Boris Johnson to take the lead on this issue in slapping down China for their behaviour. Was what Dominic Raab said today enough for you?
I'm pleased that he said it, but as you're implying, I don't think it's actually enough, because what we're seeing, this pandemic has thrown into sharp relief just exactly what China is like. They, first of all, tried to suppress the outbreak when this pandemic started. We've now seen them take advantage of perhaps the fog of COVID-19, the global distraction, to pursue its longer-term agenda with Hong Kong. And when you then step back and take a look at what it's doing economically with its One Belt, One Road initiative, what it's doing technologically, we're pushing out its Huawei telecom systems, and then militarily in pushing and owning further bits of maritime terrain in the South China Sea, you begin to appreciate that actually it's not chosen to join the international community, perhaps as we hoped that it would, as China evolved into this huge economic powerhouse. We wanted it to be a responsible global citizen and embrace those hard-fought principles of liberty and open trade. And that clearly isn't happening. What we're seeing is President Xi pursue a very, very different and dangerous agenda.
Now, explain to our listeners, Tobias, you've been working with some Republican politicians in the USA and potentially looking at a new Atlantic Charter.
Well, I must sort of declare my interest. I'm actually a dual national. I was born in New York, and I'm very keen to see our countries work closer together. I'm reminded of that amazing, famous speech that Churchill gave in Fulton, Missouri in 1946, where he spoke about the Iron Curtain lowering over Europe. And really, this was telling America, this was the wake-up call as to where the Soviets were going. It didn't really the penny didn't really drop with the Americans until 1957, when there was this so-called Sputnik moment, when that Sputnik satellite was launched. It flew across the United States, and then people realized, my goodness, we have another superpower with very different agenda, able to look at what we're doing. And what we need to do is have that other moment, recognizing that there is another superpower that is able to understand and actually take advantage of, from a digital capacity, the same way that the Soviets did from military capacity back in the prior to the Cold War.
Now, I know there was a meeting today of the National Security Council with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson, whose instincts and whose sort of entourage in many ways have been quite pro-China. Is he listening to what you've got to say on this issue, on the strategic position, and indeed on Huawei? Are you making progress with this, Tobias?
Well, we've heard some good news that's coming out of Number 10 to say they are reconsidering what's happening with Huawei. It's clearly having an impact with the Five Eyes community because there is a huge concern about whether our telecoms infrastructure will be secure or not. We've said that we're going to wean ourselves off this in the next couple of years. It's tougher for Britain because Huawei and these other Chinese companies have been embedded with us for the last 10 years or so.
Well, this was Conservative government policy, wasn't it?
Completely. And one of the reasons why my committee is actually doing a study into 5G is to better educate all of us onto the challenges that we face in having a secure system. When you buy a cappuccino and use your credit card, that involves 2 or 3 satellites, that involves a whole digital capability, which is, if interfered with, could actually bring our financial world, our ability to communicate or do business temporarily down. That is the new character of conflict. It won't be challenges from the conventional sense, from the military sense. It will be interfering in our ever reliant capability to move digital and data around the world and nationally as well. That is the way the character of conflict is going, and that's why it's so important, given that Huawei is obliged to share its data with the Chinese intelligence authorities, that we need to think again. We need to work with our allies to create a different construct.
Tobias, thank you for joining us here on LBC. That was Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP for Bournemouth East, Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, making his views on this Chinese administration and Huawei as clear as day. Back to Donald Trump.